You're listening to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Land. This podcast brings you information and resources to enhance the therapeutic effects of your practice based on a deeper understanding of anatomy, physiology, and the integration of modern science and research with traditional practices and experiences. Join me and my co-hosts Tiffany Cruikshank and Katya Bach as we dive into all things yoga, research, and wellness. Hi, Steph. Welcome back to the Yoga Medicine Podcast.
Hi, Rachel. Nice to be back.
always weird to do the fake greeting when you've just been talking for 5 minutes, but this is what we do. This is what we do on the podcast. So you're here today to talk about mythology, about stories, basically. That's what it boils down to, stories and symbols. And I think I'm excited for the conversation. It's something I know pretty much nothing about, but I'm excited because I know from my own experience that stories and symbols land with people, communicate with people in a way that facts and figures just don't. So yes. I'm excited to dive in.
Yes. And can I say something on that? It does definitely hit and land with people in a way that facts and figures don't, because when we're in the realm of myth, we're in the realm of symbolism and archetypes, which resonate with us on a conscious level and an unconscious level. So, I always use the example of like Disney and Harry Potter. There's a reason why those stories are so popular. It's because whether we're conscious of it or not, we can relate with, or we can relate to the characters in them. There's a facet of ourselves that is like Hermione or like Harry, or I haven't actually seen Harry Potter, so that's probably not a great example. But
wait, never?
I think. Hang on, wait. I've seen the first movie and I've read the first book.
Okay, well, in my humble opinion,
and I loved it.
That was the best part. First book, the most magical, the most innocent. Yeah, although, mind you, you like the dark side, and it does get darker and darker as the books progress. So maybe go back there, see what you think. But we're not here to talk Harry Potter today. Sorry, Potterheads. We're not here for you. We're here to talk more about Hindu mythology. And I'm really curious to know, what was your introduction to Hindu mythology, and how did it sort of sneak its way into your subconscious?
So from a very young age, and I don't know where I picked this up, I was always interested in like classical Greek mythology. So that was my jam. And when I was like young, I remember being in grade 6, so like 11 years old, and it was like my dream to go to Greece, because there was something about myth that I just wanted to, it was just calling me. And I did. One of the first trips I ever did was to go to Greece when I was 18 and dropped out of university. I went straight to Greece because that's just always what I wanted to do. So myth always called me. And then, and I didn't know why. And I didn't have any intellectual understanding of that. I just loved the stories. There was something about the stories that were my jam. And then when I got into yoga, I don't even know where I first learned about mythology. I can't remember like who shared it with me or the stories that I first heard. I can't remember. It's so long ago now, but obviously somewhere along the line, some teacher was telling stories or something like that. And I was like, oh, this is cool because I like mythology. And so I was like, oh, this is really interesting for me to now explore. I didn't really go anywhere with Greek mythology other than just enjoying it. But with Hindu mythology, I started to see all the connections with the practice and with what I was doing every day on the mat and what I was teaching as well. So it was just, it was destined to be me in mythology.
And do you have a favorite story? And I'm asking with full disclosure here, the only one I've ever heard is something about Hanuman doing a giant leap to save somebody's wife. So knowing that that's my background, do you have a favorite?
So I do, but some of them are actually really dark. I wanted to share a story with you, so I will if you would like to hear a story. I'll share a story with you. Okay, I'll tell you in a second. But the stories that are my favorite, I was like, they're not appropriate for for a podcast. Like, they're actually quite dark. There's a lot of darkness in the mythological, in the characters themselves and in some of the stories. And there's um, a lot of violence. And this is part of the reason why I love myth so much, is that there is such a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike, say, Disney, which made everything, even though you've got your antagonists and whatnot in the story, it still made it quite, what's the right word?
Well, simple,
Palatable to,
clean,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Family
easy for the
friendly.
mainstream. Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Whereas with Hindu mythology, there's some stories that they really go into the darkness and the depths of life, and I love that. You know me, I
Mm.
like the darkness. I'm pulled to that sort of thing. So, so some of my favorite stories are actually quite dark and violent. But I will share a story with you that I think is a great example to explain, more about myth and why I love myth so much.
Mhm.
And it's perfect because you brought up Hanuman and his big leap to get someone's wife, as you said. So the story that I wanted to share was about Hanuman. So not that particular story, but about his childhood. So most people know Hanuman. He's the monkey god. He's a pretty familiar character or energy, but he wasn't always a monkey. So, as the story goes, his mother, Anjana, that was this beautiful woman here on earth, and she desperately wanted a child. And for whatever reason, I'm not sure, maybe she was single, I don't know. She couldn't have a child. It just wasn't in the cards for her. And she would go down to the Ganges every day and she would pray up to the heavens, she'd pray up to the gods. Side note, can you ask me after this to explain gods and goddesses?
Okay.
Because as soon as I say that word, I see people start to tighten up and cringe a little bit. But I'll just say right now a quick little interjection. When I say gods or goddesses, if that word just doesn't resonate with you, just think of like energies. Just think of characters. Just replace
Mhm.
that with energies. So so Anjana was at the river and she was praying up to the heavens for this child. And the king, or the god of the winds, his name is Vayu. He was looking down at this beautiful woman and he thought, you know what, I'm gonna help her out. And so he sends down a blessing for children as these two little grains of rice. And so she's at the Ganges doing her prayers and she holds out her hands as this gesture of offering and receiving, and two little bits of rice fall into her hands. And she knew, um, that's weird thing to happen, so in her intuition was to swallow it. So she swallows these two seeds, and from the seed she becomes pregnant and she has this beautiful baby boy named Anjaneya. And Anjaneya, so his dad, he's like half god, right? Because, or godly or divine, because his dad is Vayu, the god of the winds. So he has these divine powers. He's able to make himself really big, and he's able to make himself really small, and he's able to, move things with his eyes and do all these crazy things. And as any child does, he's quite playful with this. So he's causing some mischief down on Earth. And it said that one day he was a big fan of food. Okay. So one day he looks up into the sky and he sees this perfectly round orange yellow mango. So he takes a big jump and he runs up into the sky. Of course, it's not a mango, it's the sun. And so the sun, Surya, is watching this devilish Hanuman, or Anjaneya at the time, jump up towards him, and he's like, "Oh no, this isn't good!" and throws a thunderbolt, and it hits this boy right in the jaw, kills him instantly, and he falls down to earth. I know. Now, Bayu, his dad, is watching this whole thing happen because he's up in the heavens, and of course, he's very upset. And he's the god of the wind. So what he does is he takes a huge breath in and he sucks up all the air off of Earth. So things start to suffocate and plants start to die and people start to die. And so the gods are like, oh my God, what's happened here? We need to fix this. And Vayu says, listen, until my son comes back to life, I'm not letting go of all this air. There will be no winds. So the gods come up with a solution, and they say, okay, we'll bring Anjaneya back to life, but only under two conditions. The first condition is that we're wiping his memory so he forgets all these powers. He forgets that he's divine. And the second thing is we're taking him away from his mother, which is awfully cruel. So Anjaneya is revived as Hanuman. And Hanuman then has to, he's sort of not exiled, but he has to go away from his mom. And the monkey king, Sugriva, knows what's happening and decides to kind of take him under his wing. So this monkey king takes him off into the forest, and then over time, Hanuman transforms into a monkey to fit in with his family. This is where the story, the one that you've heard of from the Ramayana, sort of intersect. So then what happens is Hanuman meets up with Rama, who lost his wife. Sita was kidnapped and off in Sri Lanka. And it said that Hanuman, he's so pure of heart and he really wanted to help out Rama. And they get to a point where they're on the coast of India and they know that she's in Sri Lanka, but they don't quite know how to get over. And so it said he sits at the edge of the water and he prays to be of service. He just wants to help. He has the purest heart and the purest intentions. And it said that in that moment he remembers who he is. He remembers his powers. He remembers that he's divine. He remembers his potential. He remembers who he is. And so that's when this is this part that where he grows to be this massive monkey and he takes this giant leap across over to Sri Lanka to get Sita. And so that's where the story of Hanumanasana, the splits pose, comes from. It's from his big leap. So sorry, that was a lot of talking, but there's your story. So you can take that as a story and it's like, okay, cool, that was cute, nice little story about a monkey. And not all stories resonate with everyone, right? It might just be something that you hear and then goes in one ear and out the other. Or there might be a part of that story that moves you, just like when you watch Harry Potter and there's something in it that moves you. Then we can look at that story and look at the symbolism of it and, look at, okay, what a familiar story of a child just exploring, just playing in the world, trying to figure themselves out. They've got all the potential in the world. And then they get, contained or stifled or punished. And after doing, and we all experience this. We all do things, whether we're bad at sports and someone tells us that we suck at soccer or something, we never want to play soccer again. It's like we get kind of squashed, we get made to be small. And we forget our potential, we forget who we are in so many ways. And it's through the path of life that and the people that we meet and the intentions that we have and our stories that we start to unravel these things and learn about ourselves and really learn about our fullest potential. So I'll stop talking in a second here, but this is an example of how we can take these stories and connect with them in a deeper way and think like, oh, how am I? I always use the example of Aladdin because that was my favorite movie growing up. It's like, where's the Jasmine in me? Where's that feminine energy that's totally constrained and ruled by the masculine? Like, where is that in me? Where's the Jafar in me? The like evil, the evil, whatever, I can't remember exactly what he is, servant or whatever. Where's the king, the blind, totally naive, totally blind, doesn't see what's going on? Like, where is that in us as well? So we take these stories, and again, it can just be a nice story, or it can be something that's like it unlocks a door to understanding ourselves so much more deeply.
Yeah, the thing that really struck me from the way that you told that story was the moment where he was so pure of heart and all good intention. And it was in that moment where he'd almost given up his ego completely that he remembered who he was, that it wasn't in service of himself and his own ends. It was, if only there was something I could do, I want to help, if only there was some way I could. And then he kind of found that hidden potential. And I can see how if you're able to ask the question, is there somewhere in your life that you could find some extra little some skill, some something that you didn't realize that you had purely through service of others might, put other people in his shoes, assuming he was wearing shoes as a monkey.
Maybe,
Maybe,
but
maybe
yes,
not.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. So we take these little bits of the stories, and hopefully they are little plant little seeds for people
yeah.
to consider more deeply.
Yeah, and I think the storytelling part of it is really important because in life, maybe nowadays more than ever before, a lot of us are walking around with our minds closed. We know what we believe, we know what's important to us, we know who our people are, and we know who our people aren't. And if you get straight to a question of, what should happen here or what should the outcome be, we tend to speak from that much more limited place. Whereas when you're told a story, especially if, like me, you have very little familiarity with what the outcome's going to be and where it's going, you're just along for the ride. You're open, you're curious, there's no barriers in place, you're just listening. And then when you get to the point where there could be a moral or a question or, you know, a, a kind of a metaphor for something in daily life, you're already in that place of listening with a more open heart and a more open mind, more able to put yourself in the position of the character as opposed to, you know, having a step back and thinking, is this my kind of person? Is this something that would happen to me? Is this something that I would do or believe in? So there's this
Mhm.
inherent openness that listening to the story creates that allows perhaps more pure communication.
I completely agree, and just more curiosity for
Mm,
life.
mm,
You know, for example, so I tell these stories a lot during my classes. So I would have told that story that I just told you. I would tell that in a sequence, and then of course when he comes to doing the splits, that's when we're going to come into the splits pose and that sort of thing. So I do share a lot of these stories throughout class, and people, just like us, again, with the example of Disney or Harry Potter or something, there's some people that like they're obsessed with Harry Potter, and then there's some people who just they hate Harry Potter, they don't like
yeah.
it or whatever. And that's totally fine. But through learning all these stories, it's something I'll always, prompt people to consider is like, why did you love that story so much? Like, what is it about monkeys that you love so much? Like, where's
Mm,
the symbolism in that? Or what is it about, someone's journey or someone being kidnapped or someone being killed that you loved or you hated or that you
mm,
hated? And hopefully that opens people up to, seeing things in their lives of like,
yeah.
why do you love that person so much, or why does that person bother you so much?
Yeah. What
And
does
start
that
to
mean to
see
you? What does
life
that
with more
represent?
complexity. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah,
Exactly.
you wanted me
Yeah.
to ask you about gods and goddesses, and I did listen to a podcast yesterday, completely, not for research or anything, just one of the ones that I normally listen to. And in the conversation, they were talking about storytelling, and the guest said something along the lines of, God is just a blanket that we put over the divine to give it shape. And he was talking about, capital G God. He was talking about his Christian God. But to me, it still made sense that I think most of us appreciate some level of magic or mystery in life that we can't fully comprehend or explain. And you know, whatever your holy book is, whatever your holy stories are, whatever your symbols are, they're blankets put over that thing to give it shape that we can comprehend. Or at least that was
Mhm.
his premise, and it made sense to me as somebody who isn't religious. I was like, yes, of course, we have to have a way of talking about it and explaining it and giving it shape. So that's what came to my mind when you said to ask you about
Yeah.
gods and goddesses. Is that where you were headed or somewhere different?
I wouldn't have said anything as articulate or eloquent as that, but yeah,
Well, I
that's
mean,
actually
stolen from
really
somebody else much smarter than me, but it spoke to me. I was like, yeah, that makes sense.
it's beautiful. It really is
Mm,
beautiful. So I'll usually say, and this is, maybe a bigger conversation, but I think it's something that unfortunately really puts people off who've had, you know, maybe even traumatic experiences growing up around religion, and there's a
Mm.
lot of divisiveness that, here in Glasgow, there's a lot of divisiveness around religion and whatnot. And so as soon as people hear God, they like, you can see it in their faces. They just shut down.
Yeah,
Not
because for
physically,
most
but
people, it
you
has a
see it.
meaning. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. 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 And so when I'm here talking about like a god in the form of a monkey, I think people can maybe take offense to that. The thing is with me though, that is really great is that my studio is named after a goddess. So if you take offense to that, you wouldn't come into the door in the first place.
Yeah.
So I noticed it much more when I was in Canada, actually. Of people getting really offended by that. But basically the reason I wanted you to ask me about it is because I don't want anyone to be put off. I understand why that language might not resonate with everyone, and that's okay. These stories aren't necessarily about um, the gods and goddesses. That's why I said, use the term energy or characters
Characters.
instead, or interchange. Yeah, because it really
Yeah.
is, all they are is it's an energy current. It's a specific, unique current. Hanuman has a current that's very different from Kali, and Kali is a current that's very different from Ganesha, right? So
Mm.
it's just that. It's just energy currents.
Yeah, and I think if you're listening to a story, we're all used to going to the movies or watching TV shows. Surely you can see it as this is a character in this story. It doesn't have to have any bigger meaning than that to me right now in this moment. It could just be a character in this story. It also could have, if that's your faith. That's there's room for interpretation there. But that was a question that I wanted to ask you was, as a teacher, do you have any suggestions for people who are excited about mythology and would like to weave a little
Mm,
bit more into their classes, given that they're likely to have a pretty diverse group of students, some of whom will
mhm.
have some exposure to Hinduism, some of whom perhaps don't want any exposure to Hinduism, and that's not what they come to yoga for. So, any suggestions for teachers there who'd like to start sharing some?
The first thing I would say is to, this goes for anything with yoga or life, is to make sure that I know it sounds obvious, but make sure that you understand it first. Like,
Mm,
really understand it. Not in a way. So, for example, I told you a story and then I kind of said, the symbolism and whatnot. I wouldn't normally do that part in a class. I
mm,
would say the story and then just let it sit.
sit.
And because it's not up to me to decide what the symbolism means for them. So I don't want to tell them what it should mean and what it symbolizes because it's going to be unique. A monkey to me might mean something completely different to you, right? So, but to know the story enough that you're I was about to say telling it correctly there, but there's so many different versions of stories. Like the story that I just told, there's probably someone out there that's like, "That's not what I heard. I heard it was
Mm,
something else," and that's fine. There's a lot of spaciousness with it, but I think you do have to, just like anything with yoga, you do have to have it embodied and really understand it before sharing. But then what I would say is, I to share it in a vinyasa class is tricky. It's
mhm.
doable, but it's the most challenging thing that I teach because, as I'm sure you can imagine, you have to get a lot of language out without talking, like while leaving space for them to be in the experience. And then you have to time everything right. So make sure that you hit this part of the story by the time they get to this pose and
Mm.
whatnot. And always leave space for creativity and that sort of thing. So if someone out there is really wanting to share this in class, maybe start with it in like a yin or a restorative. I would often story tell in restorative because of course you can leave them for 10 minutes and
Mhm.
and you can actually read it from. I've often done this where I'll actually read it from a book. I'll read it straight from the book, whether it's straight from the Mahabharata or a mythology book or something like that, because people love being read to. So start off where you've got the time and space to do it, and then start to bring it into vinyasa if you like. But the cool thing about bringing it into vinyasa is that so many of the poses are brought to life through these stories, like Warrior One. Why is that called Warrior One? There's
Mm.
a whole story behind that. Or Warrior Two or Warrior Three, there's stories behind that. And I find that my students, they love it, it brings so much meaning when you know the story behind it. So it's really fun when you can do it in vinyasa. It's just practice.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a really good practical tip, to start somewhere where time is not a concern, and you can learn to distill the story down to more concise little chunks, and learn to leave space between them. And then maybe you pick the easiest story, the shortest, the one that you're most familiar and most comfortable with, to start sprinkling into vinyasa. I think that's a really good practical tip. But the second thing that you said about people then becoming familiar with the stories behind the things that we do in yoga, even in that story, my ears were pricking up at, oh, yes, Vayus. I know about Vayus in yoga.
Yes.
Anjaneyasana. I wonder if Anjaneyasana has something to do with, yes. And then Hanumanasana. Oh, of course. So there's even those little reminders kind of pique up your interest, because that's something you've heard before, that's familiar. And then it sort of entices you to go down pull on the next little thread to see where that one goes. So I can see how, for people who are
Yes.
into it, it would create this sort of never-ending cycle of getting more and more curious and diving a little bit more into the depths and the background.
Yeah, but don't you feel like it just bring like, how many times have you said Anjaneyasana before
Yeah.
or Hanumanasana before, and now you're like, "Whoa, that's where it
Yeah.
comes from. That's so cool."
Yeah. I think of all of the poses now in the textbook that are named after a saint, and I'm like, there's probably a story there.
There is a story there. Usually a very good story. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a great, really practical tip in terms of timing and kind of figuring out how to get the story out, as well as essential cues for poses, as well as space for people to simply be in their experience. What about the challenge of working with people who have a different belief set? You know, you said in Canada it was more of a challenge, that there would be people come who were
Mhm.
perhaps a little more resistant to hearing you talk about other gods and goddesses outside of their faith. Is that something that you've ever addressed when you're teaching?
Again, I'll always say a little disclaimer at the start of my
Hmm.
practice, but I like to make it really lighthearted. I try to make it as lighthearted as possible. And I will say, listen, if the word God and goddess makes you cringe, just pretend I'm saying energy or character. And
Hmm.
then I'll say, but you are at the Cali Collective. So, and this is a studio themed off of a goddess. So I don't know if you
It's
knew that,
kind of
but
what we do.
so, and with you've been to Cali, and it's like as soon as you go
Yeah.
in, you see pictures of the goddess. So,
Yeah. If you're
I
somebody
think
who's
that they would be
easily,
turned off.
yeah, if you're somebody who's easily freaked out by things along those lines, I don't know that you'd make it to reception.
You wouldn't make it past the website. But I realize not everyone's in that situation. I
Hmm.
think I think what it comes down to, and I think this is really important, is trust.
Hmm.
That they trust that I'm sharing this from a place that is pure of heart. I'm not
Yeah.
trying to convert anyone.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to offend anyone.
Yeah.
I'm trying to just bring a beautiful story, a story that's really meaningful to me. And you can
Mm.
tell, because I am really passionate about this, and you can tell when I'm teaching. So I would hope that if someone was kind of like, ugh, about it, they would be able to see that I I'm not trying to offend anyone, and see past that. Or and again, a lot of the people, and I know that not everyone is has this experience, but most people that come to Cali, I know, and I've known them for a really long time. So
Yeah.
there's that relationship that hopefully, if they were really offended, they would be able to talk to me about it after, and we can kind of
Yeah.
figure something out. But
Yeah, and I
it's
think
a
that's
tough
another
one.
really no, I think that's another really good tip is, firstly, share things that mean something to you, and it doesn't have to be something deep and religious, but it's something that,
Mm.
reminds you of a time in your life when you had that question, or you had that experience, or, you faced that challenge. Talk from something that means something to you, and talk with that really um open set of intentions. I'm sharing something that was meaningful or helpful to me, and that's it. You don't have to take it in. You don't need to internalize it. You don't need to change because of it. I'm just offering something that was helpful for me in case it's
Yeah.
helpful for you. End of conversation. You don't need to change. You don't need to convert. This doesn't need to become your story. Just sharing
Mhm.
lightly. And I think that's also really good advice.
Yeah, and it goes with any sort of theming that you do in class that is really explicit like this. Like today we're talking about Hanuman. That's very explicit. So if someone comes to my class, they have to listen to the story about Hanuman. They don't have a choice. Versus if I was teaching something that was more subtle about compassion and just kind of like dropping it in. So with any of that more explicit theming, I think it's important for someone to, just read the room, read the crowd. Is this the right time for this? Is this the right place? And just be intuitive with it.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful too. And if you're getting a lot of internal pushback, or you feel like you are, maybe you just do a shorter version, leave a lighter touch at the end, and move on. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
you're
I've
right,
had that
'cause you can
experience.
feel it.
Yeah, teaching a class on patience, for example, and people aren't feeling particularly patient that day. I might do a couple of the points that I was planning to hit, and then I'm like, I'm not going to hit the other points I was planning to. We're going to dial it back because people aren't feeling it today, and they paid money to be here, so fair enough. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So I guess my next question would be, in this community of teachers and students who are pretty evidence-based, who are sort of nerdy and intelligent, but brainy, why do you think that myths, mythology, stories, symbols are important? Because they might not be where this population of people naturally lean. What do they bring to the table that the evidence-based approach doesn't? And I know the answer, but say it. Yeah.
Well, I think I know that evidence-based science stuff is valuable. We need it. We have to.
That's our
We need
quote
it.
from this episode. Evidence-based science stuff is valuable. Steph Wall.
That
It's true.
sciencey stuff. It's great. It's really great. But that's only one side of the coin. Like there's the mystery to life that we can't, even within science, there's so much we can't explain. There's so much mystery. And I think that if you don't have to be an expert at all things, but to just be open to the mystery and that realm, that mythic realm where we don't know the answers. I can't tell you what that story on Hanuman, I can't tell you what that should mean to you or how you should feel. I can't. You need to feel into it. And a lot of these answers are, well, there's often not answers. They're usually lifelong.
Yeah.
Or very, very open-ended. You might never know why you hate Harry Potter, but it's something that just kind of sits there, or I don't know
Yeah.
why I keep
No,
using Harry Potter.
you're absolutely right. And even in, Norse mythology and Greek mythology, there are plenty of pretty dark and depressing stories. It's not good things always happen to good people, bad things always happen to bad people. There's always a comeuppance. Weird things happen to all people, and bad things happen to good people, and vice versa. I think mythologies of all origins share that, because that's the experience of life. It's not neat and tidy. People don't get their comeuppance. Good things don't always happen to good people. There's messiness, there's darkness, there's complexity there. So why would it not be in our storytelling when it's in our lived experience?
100%. And I know that people like things to be really linear. A plus B equals C. This is why I feel this. This is why this is happening. This is why the stretch works. This is what it's stretching. And the realm of myth, there's nothing linear about it. So it does make us, or invites us, to step into a place of complexity, unconscious, like seeing, like, being curious about, gosh, why am I so annoyed about that story? Or why am I just like, angry? Or, and it asks us to, invites us to ask deeper, bigger questions of ourselves and our lives and our experience. And, that makes some people uncomfortable. They don't like going there.
Yeah.
So, but I think to answer your question, I do think that it's really open to have both. Again, you don't need to be an expert on both, but to be open to both.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we see this in news stories everywhere we look, that there are facts, there are figures, there are numbers, and distances and temperatures and all of that sort of stuff. But they will almost always try to share a personal story as well. There's almost always some individual being interviewed or some tale being told that makes the facts and figures take shape and form and allows you to relate. What would it be like if I were there? What was that person's experience? How did they feel? How do they look? How do they sound? So even in the most basic shared information like the news story, you can see how it's not enough just to provide facts and figures to really communicate with people. You have to speak to that unconscious and emotional side as well. And that's where you bring up feelings that, that are our experience in the world. We aren't just brains walking around with bodies. Well, I guess emotions kind of are in the brain as well as in the body, but you know what I mean? We're not just
I know.
logical. We're not computers or robots. We are complex, organic symphonies of contradictions. And so
Yes.
why should the way we communicate just be clear and scientific and logical and evidence-based when that's not always the way that speaks to people?
100%. And
Mm.
the other thing, Rach, is like, it's just fun. It's just fun, and it can just be fun. It's like, let's listen to a story for
Mhm.
45 minutes, an hour, and take it or leave it, whatever. But just like, there's so much lightheartedness to it. Like the story I was telling, a grain of rice is in her palm and then she eats it and becomes pregnant. Like, come on, it's just lighthearted and it's cute and it's there's it's just joyous to be told a story, for me at least, to be told a
Mm.
story and just not have to think about the craziness of
Life,
life, I suppose.
bills,
Yeah.
tax, all that stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I think you've given some great suggestions to people. Do dive into mythology, find the stories that speak to you, that resonate with you, think about them, reflect on them, ask yourself why you feel the way you do about them, what they represent to you or what they trigger for you. And when you feel like you've got good grounding in a story, you could start to share it with students somewhere where you've got some time in yin, in restorative, in a super slow and steady class where there is room for information other than put your left foot here and reach your left arm up there. And as you get
Mhm.
more comfortable with that, and as you get better at reading people's reactions and responses and choosing, which parts of the story you share and how concisely you do it, then you could start to translate that into faster paced classes where there's a little bit less time. And, as you get more trained in that storytelling muscle, you can apply it in more challenging situations. And always open heart, open intention, sharing something because it's fun, because it's different, because it might speak to a layer of this person that is different to the this pose will lengthen your hamstrings part of their brain, and just see what happens. Let the magic unfold.
See what happens. Yeah. And in the meantime, just like enjoy story. Look around a little bit at, the movies that you're watching, the
Mm.
shows that you love, and just ask yourself like, I wonder what that character represents in me, or I wonder
Yeah.
why I'm so emotional about this. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
So you are teaching more classes on yoga medicine online. You'll be offering a couple of classes each month, at least for the next 6 months. So can we expect any mythology in the yoga medicine online classes?
No,
Oh,
no,
come
after all of
on.
this. I'm joking. Imagine. Yes, I am going to do and do some, and I'm really curious what how people, or if people enjoy it. So I'd love some feedback if people want to let me
Feedback.
know.
Well, anything else that you want to share along the realm of mythology today? Any last messages for people to take away?
I wish I could say like go get this book or do that, but really myth is alive all around us. These stories
Mm.
are playing out all around us in dynamics between you and your parents, you and your best friend, you and your dog. Like these dynamics are everywhere. So just lean into the realm of the mythic and the mystery and start seeing all these stories, come to life in your day-to-day existence.
Mm. Oh, I love that. Thank you very much. And if people want to find you and learn more about what you do, where would you send them?
Probably my Instagram, which is at Steph Wall Yoga, or stephwallyoga.com.
Great. We'll share them in the show notes. Thanks very much. This was fun, and it's inspired me to go back and figure out the story behind Anjaneyasana, perhaps. Tug on another thread of the story.
Yes, please do.
I love it. Thanks very much, Steph.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Yoga Medicine. If you liked the show, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you got something out of this episode, please spread the word and share it with a friend. You can find more information, articles, trainings, and classes at yogamedicine.com. Check us out on social media as Yoga Medicine, or you can email us at info@yogamedicine.com. Thank you for being part of our Yoga Medicine community. The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.